Hi, it's Sandra from SandraD Imagery, and I'm going to share with you the magic of the transform tool. And I learnt the transform tool a number of years ago when I was creating landscapes. And it's a tool that can be overlooked, and it's one that I'll use in landscapes or my creative images, particularly in composites as well. Now, for example, this image here is taken straight out of camera. And I love these trees, and the light that's on the hill is natural. But when I photographed this, I had to have a telephoto lens on, and so I couldn't get close to the trees. And this is where the transform tool helped me change my composition. So for example, my next layer that I'll turn on is a texture layer, one of my textures called Harvest Gold. And to me, that just gives it that real deep, moody, grungy look. I apply another texture, and that's where I get a little bit more of that textured surface, a little bit more of a linen. And then as I go through, I'll turn on these layers, and that's virtually my processing that I've done. But now I want the viewer to actually feel like they're closer into the composition. And this is where I use the transform tool, not the crop tool, but the transform tool. And so, for example, I'll turn this layer on, one click, and have a look. I've now brought the viewer actually closer to the trees. I'll turn that layer off and look at the foreground, and I'll turn that layer on. Now, I know that some people will say, but you can do that in crop. But the transform gives you a lot more tools that you can work with. So for example, I'm going to click onto this image, and this is straight out of camera, no editing, and it was taken in Tuscany, and couldn't get close to this beautiful villa. And I love the foreground, but I want the viewer to actually feel closer to the actual subject or the hero. So I'm going to show you how I use the transform for this. So I'll duplicate the layer, and then what I'll do is use the transform tool, Control T or Command T if you're on Mac. And so that now has put a bounding, what I call a bounding box. And what I'm going to do is right mouse click and click on Scale. And I'll hold down my Control or Alt key, and I'll drag the corner handle, and I'll bring that down. And now I've just changed the composition. Now, when you're working with scale, there's a few little tricks and tips, but this is just a simple way of using transform tool with scale. Now, another way that you can use your transform tool is there is my lovely background that I've created and Zachary the zebra. And I'm going to use the transform tool, and I want to actually just give him a little bit of sizing. So I'll do Control T, and I'll grab the corner handles, and I can make him bigger or smaller. But for this instance, I'm just going to make him a little bit bigger. There's more to the transform tool than just straight transforming an image like I did with that house or composition. Let's say that I want to change how Zachary looks. So I'm going to use Control T or Command T, and I'll get that bounding box. But if I right mouse click, I can actually flip Zachary, move him around or change him back. And another feature that is fantastic is the warp tool. Now, if you right mouse click in the middle of Control T, you get perspective, distort Q, rotate, and scale, which I briefly showed you. But for example, warp, and I'll click on warp, and I'm going to just give it a grid, very quickly, and I'm going to just change how Zachary's ears look. And I also might just make that a little bit more stripes, change it. And that's one way to use warp. Now that was very simple, but there's some tips and tricks that you need to be aware of when you're using the warp tool. So the magic of the transform tool, there's many, many things that you can use. So I'll just recap. You've got scale, rotate, skew, distort, perspective, and warp. I don't always use all of them, but I use a number of them in my landscapes or my creative images. Have fun experimenting with the transform tool. It opens up so many possibilities, whether it's landscapes or composite imagery.